He says, virtually everything that aliens do is in service to their abduction program. He goes on to say, we now know that the abduction phenomenon as a whole is not for the purpose of research. So aliens, they're not just abducting people because they're interested and they're inquiring of the human race and what we're about, and they're not abducting just for research purposes only. The evidence suggests that all of the alien procedures serve a reproductive agenda. All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Tat2d Preacher podcast. This is episode number 30. This is the podcast that takes a look at things pertaining to Christianity, culture, and the church from a biblical perspective. And so in today's episode, we're finally going to tackle the subject and the phenomena of alien abductions. And it's not just going to be some kind of a history lesson about it. There's a ton of material out there. But I want to look at this subject from a Christian perspective. Like, how do Christians wrestle with this? What does the Bible potentially have to say about this cultural phenomenon that's happening? And to be honest, man, I'll get into it in a minute, but this was tough to prep for and to study and to research, because it's uncomfortable. But that's where we're going on this episode. But as always, if you haven't yet, follow me on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube at the Tat2d Preacher. All the links to that will be in the description below. And if you haven't yet, please leave me a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify or whatever your favorite podcast platform is. That would just help the podcast out immensely. And yeah, that's my little cheesy social media plug. And here we go. Alien abductions from a Christian perspective. Sit back, relax, enjoy the episode. I've been interested in everything pertaining to aliens, as I mentioned, I think back in episode 26 or 25 when I talked about the Bible and UFOs. I've been interested with this stuff pretty much for the last year and a half, maybe 2 years. Prior to that, I never would have given this stuff the time of day. You know, I was of the mindset that, man, this is just all it's all garbage. You know, it's a hoax, or it's not real, it's made up. I put no stock in it. But when you see what's been happening in our culture in this whole realm in the last 2 years, and as I've dove in more deep into this subject, especially as we're talking about alien abductions and this whole phenomena, it I struggle with it because it's freaky. It's not something that you can just dismiss anymore. And the more you dive into it and you actually look at the evidence and you look at all the data that is out there pertaining to this, you can't just dismiss it anymore. To sit there and say, oh, it's all fake, it's all a hoax, it's all made up. It is more probable now, when you look at all the data, it's more probable that this event is happening versus it all being fake. And that's what I was just like, man, we gotta have to figure this out. How do we process this? Because I'm thinking from a Christian perspective. Like, what are we gonna do with this? How do we wrestle with this? How can we wrap our minds around it? And because it's happening, and it's been happening for a lot of years all over the world to literally tens of thousands of different people. And so it was a struggle for me to dive in, and I think that's why the last few episodes I've just been kind of like trying to find reasons to not talk about it, to be honest. I mean, I'm happy with the kind of stuff that we did talk about, and then last week I was sick, but yeah. And so this whole subject it's a very lengthy one, and there's no way we could cover it all in one episode, and I'm not sure if I want to turn this into a few more episodes. I don't know, but I just felt like I did want to address it and share some of my thoughts on it and try to process it at least on a general basic level from a Christian perspective, because I know there's a lot of Christians that have questions and they're seeing stuff and they're hearing stuff, and so that's the purpose for this. So a quick recap from, I think, episode 26 of the podcast, where I talked about the Bible and UFOs, and that phenomenon, the whole UFO thing, is connected to the abduction phenomena that we're going to get into today. That it's been, again, happening for hundreds of years. This is not just some recent thing. The data suggests it's been happening for a long time. And as we looked into with Bible and UFOs, there is such a thing as divine technology. And as we looked at the UFOs, they've recovered craft and they've recovered parts of the craft, and the origin of that craft, the makeup of it, is not from Earth. And so this is what creates a lot of like, what is going on here? Because we can't create that. We don't have those materials. And so if it's coming from another realm, it's coming from another dimension, however you want to look at that, divine technology is a real thing. And so when we're talking about the abduction part of it, it's going to be using a lot of technology and methodology and things that we don't necessarily have. And so I want to preface our talk in this episode just by saying that we have to remember that there is such thing as divine technology, or technology that has come from another realm, ideas that have come from another realm, done by beings that are not from Earth. And I'm going to get into a bit more of a recap in a few minutes here, but I want to put that at the forefront, that we're not just talking about something earthly. This is something that encompasses ideas and behaviors and methodologies and all that from a species, a being that is not from Earth. Okay, so let's look at some scripture here to start off, because I want to set up a supernatural worldview here. Ephesians 6:12 says this: "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." And then Colossians 1:16 says this: "For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him." All right, so let's look at this verse here, or these verses. When we're looking at the idea that of these rulers, these authorities, these cosmic powers, these spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places, these beings that are invisible, these thrones, these dominions, these authorities, all of this language, this is from the Apostle Paul, and he's describing the unseen realm and the fact that it's not just angels and demons, that the unseen realm is a lot more complicated. It's a lot more complex, as I've mentioned a lot of times on this podcast. And so as we look at and discuss the subject of aliens, the idea that there are supernatural beings, there are other entities, should not be alarming to us. That already in our Christian worldview, this has already been established. Like, extraterrestrial just means not from Earth. And so the Bible goes into great detail and highlights a ton of extraterrestrial entities or beings. We have, as I just mentioned, these thrones, these dominions, these rulers, these authorities, these cosmic powers, these spiritual forces of evil. Those are entities. Those are beings that live in the unseen realm. Then we also have angels, cherubim, seraphim, the watchers, the sons of God. We have demons. We have disembodied spirits, ghosts in the Bible, in the text. And that's not an exhaustive list. When you do a deep dive, a deep study into that, I mean, there is a ton of textual evidence in the Bible that the unseen realm is filled with so many more, or is more complex than just angels and demons. And so again, the idea that there's an unseen realm filled with a hierarchy, filled with multiple factions of entities, is already in our worldview. So it shouldn't surprise us. It shouldn't. Our default reaction shouldn't be, it's fake. It's not real. Because we already have a worldview that's filled with entities that are in the unseen realm that 99% of us have not seen, yet we believe it. So when it comes to aliens, we should have more of an open mind because it's already in our worldview. Right? That's the point I'm trying to make. Where we have these entities that live in the unseen realm, live in a different realm, a different dimension, and they interact with humanity. All throughout the Bible, we see angels, we see the watchers, the sons of God, we see demonic entities interacting with humans. So, again, aliens should not be a foreign concept to us. And I also want to note that these beings that inhabit the unseen realm, they've been around a lot longer than us. I mean, we go back to Genesis chapter 1, and I think I did an episode back in episode 24, 25, the pre-Adamic world, the world that pre-existed Adam and Eve. And it's a theory that I'm leaning more and more towards, but regardless, the point is that even in Genesis chapter 1, the angels were already created before humanity got there. Before God made Adam and Eve, the unseen realm, the angelic realm already existed. So these beings, they've been around a lot longer than us. They're a lot more intelligent than us. They're a lot more powerful, a lot more skillful. They know how the world works. They understand science. They understand chemistry. They understand physics. They understand the outworkings of our world in a way that you and I couldn't even fathom. And again, I think a lot of times we have this naive beliefs about angels. We just think, they just float around and they're just, God's messengers, but they don't really know much or do much. These are like far superior to humans in every way. And as we looked at in the Bible and UFO episode, there's technology in that world that they have, that they use, that they deal with. So again, these are intelligent, powerful, skillful beings that the Bible talks about. And so I just want to put that in your mind as well, as we're looking at beings in the unseen realm, that they're not just, have the same intelligence as humans. They're far more superior to us. So I want to set the stage with that. And now I want to look at what are aliens. And I alluded to this back in episode 25, 26. But I want to dive a bit deeper into what are aliens, because it's going to help us as we talk about the abduction part of this. So there are a lot of UFO researchers and ufologists, people that have studied this whole phenomenon for decades. There's a few guys that I've engaged with, a few guys that I've really listened to. But one of the most well-known ufologists out there is a guy named David Jacobs. And he is the retired associate professor of history at Temple University. He specialized in 20th century American history. But he's also, for over 30 years, explored the whole UFO and abduction phenomenon. He's written multiple books. And so I really like this dude because he is an accredited guy. He's not just some guy that lived in his mom's basement and came up with all these theories. This is a guy that is a smart dude. He was a professor at a major university. And over the course of his 30 years, he's conducted literally thousands of interviews with people who have allegedly been abducted. And he's taken all of those thousands of interviews and all the data that he's accumulated, plus all of his own research outside of his own personal encounters. And he's compiled a system whereby he delineates between credible evidence and non-credible evidence, and a whole system of questions that he asks the people he's interviewing, people who've been abducted, and compiles it in the most succinct and credible way possible. And so a lot of people who are in this space, they point to this guy, Dave Jacobs, as being, one of the most prominent figures who look at this stuff. And so he's a smart guy. So a lot of the stuff that I've gotten, it's been from his work, his material. But then there's a few other guys that some of you may or might not know, guys like Tim Alberino, L.A. Marzulli. These are guys in the Christian space that have really went after the whole alien phenomenon as well. They have a ton of good stuff, and they also reference David Jacobs as well. So those are the other guys, but mainly David Jacobs is who I've really looked at and tried to gain an understanding from his experiences and from his 30 plus years and his thousands and thousands of documented cases of research. So, what are aliens? And there are a few different branches that have been reported. The most common alien that is seen are the grays. And they are the small, little, thin, big heads, almond black eyes kind of creatures. They are the most common that are seen, but there are short ones and there are also tall ones. And what's been documented is that the tall ones are the leaders of the shorter ones. That the short gray aliens, they're the guys, they're like the worker bees, man. They do the majority of the work. They do the abductions. They perform all of the operational things that we're going to get into in a bit. And then the tall ones are kind of their overseers. And so you have the short and you have the taller grays. And then you have what's described as the Insectilians. And these guys are kind of overseeing the short and the tall ones. And so they're described as looking like praying mantis type creatures, grasshopper type creatures. And they're usually the ones that are, in charge. They're the guys that pretty much run the show according to, again, the thousands of accounts that Jacobs has looked into, plus other accounts. This is kind of how it's always been reported. So you have the Insectilians, and then you have what's referred to as the Nordics, and these are the human-looking hybrids. And so we're going to get into this in a little bit, but the whole purpose for abductions is the hybridization. The aliens trying to create a human-alien hybrid to infiltrate our society. And so the Nordics are part of that program. They are part of the result of that program. They are the human-looking alien-human hybrids. And then you also have these robed creatures that there's not a ton of information on these guys, but these guys seem to be the boss over everybody. So if you're on a UFO aircraft and all of these different entities were on there, these robed creatures, they're seen with like a hood over their head. You can't really see their face. They're very vague descriptions, but these guys seem to be the boss over the Greys, the Insectilians, as well as the Nordics. And so, again, this data, this information has been ciphered from the thousands upon thousands of documented accounts of those who've allegedly been abducted. So there's strong support, ton of corroborating evidence. Pretty much everyone says the same thing. So take that as you may, but this is typically the hierarchy and the structure of these alien creatures. Now the big question, why do they abduct? What is the purpose of abducting humans? Yes, there's these different hierarchy of alien beings, and what is the purpose of them? Why do they do what they do? Well, Jacobs writes in one of his books, he says this. He says, virtually everything that aliens do is in service to their abduction program. He goes on to say, we now know that the abduction phenomenon as a whole is not for the purpose of research. So aliens, they're not just abducting people because they're interested and they're inquiring of the human race and what we're about, and they're not abducting just for research purposes only. The evidence suggests that all of the alien procedures serve a reproductive agenda. This is the huge part here. A reproductive agenda. And at the heart of the reproductive agenda is the breeding program, in which aliens collect human sperm and eggs. They incubate fetuses in human hosts to produce alien-human hybrids and cause humans to mentally and physically interact with these hybrids for the purposes of their development. So let that sink in for a second. And again, the first time I heard this stuff, man, I'm like, this is nuts. This is like, what is going on here? The whole purpose of this abduction phenomenon is the breeding program. This reproductive agenda to create alien-human hybrids. And when you dive deeper into that, there's a lot of rabbit holes you can go down. And I mean, that's a subject for a different episodes. Now, the aliens, they to facilitate this breeding program, and I'm going to get into some actual case studies, real life examples from interviews, but they're obsessed with collecting, human sperm from obviously males, and then eggs from females, and using DNA altering methods, and they're trying to splice their DNA with human DNA, and they have this whole, I guess, this whole medical structure of how they create fetuses and how they use human women as kind of real life incubators to grow these babies, these fetuses, to a certain part. And there's tons, like thousands of cases where women, they get abducted, and then they have these surgical procedures done to them, and then they go to the doctor, and they're having symptoms of being pregnant, and they go to the doctor, and the doctor gives them examination, and sure enough, they're pregnant. And then all of a sudden, 4 months later, they go back to the doctor, and there's no evidence of them ever being pregnant. And so it's stumping a lot of doctors, and there's so many women having the same experience, because according to all the data and the research here, that aliens use women as incubators for a certain period of time. And they implant the genetically modified DNA into the woman. The fetus, this hybrid fetus, grows to a certain size, and then they go in and take it out. And they do this repeatedly. And this process of doing that is called, in Jacob's books, it's called I'm not going to pronounce this right, but the extrauterine gestational units, where this is how women are used as these gestational incubators for these alien hybrid fetuses. And again, like this sounds crazy. I get it. It sounds nuts. But this isn't just one or two cases. This is just these random things. This is literally thousands upon thousands of women having these experiences over the decades, all over the world. Different races, different ethnicities, different ages. And there's no way that all of this is just one massive hoax. Like that the probability of that is far less than if these events, these things happening to these women are real. And so here's a few stories here that highlight this particular procedure where women are used as these real life incubators. And so one woman said it was as if aliens were filling their area surrounding their reproductive organs with air, and it would lead them to feel very uncomfortable and bloated. And many women said that it even felt like their internal organs were being moved around. So that during this process, where I guess the aliens were they were creating space inside of their reproductive areas so that they could implant the fetus inside of them. A woman by the name of Lucy Sanders described it this way. She said, and I quote, "It's on my right side, my right pelvic side. It's making me burn. It's making my insides burn. They're blowing me up. He's pulling it out now. He's patting my leg and saying it's all right, that I should calm down now. Holy Lord. I don't know. It hurt. It burned. I feel like I'm blown up." And then Jacobs is conducting this interview. He says, "Well, how do you mean blown up? Like a balloon?" And the woman responds, and I quote, "Now the feeling is going away, but I feel puffy. He's pushing on my stomach area, pushing in and moving his fingers." So that's a little excerpt from one of the interviews that Jacobs did with a girl named Lucy Sanders, who experienced this very procedure where it feels like during her abduction, where she feels like they are blowing up her insides. They're trying to create space to put the fetuses in there. Another case, Laura Mills, she described a similar procedure. And Jacobs asks her, "What do you think he's going to do down there?" And she responds, "I really don't know what the heck he's doing." And then Jacobs writes, "If you had to make a wild guess, what do you think he's up to?" And she responds, "I know it sounds silly, but they're trying to figure out how much space I have inside or something. So they might be measuring or whatever inside the uterus area. I'm not sure. And so again, in her situation, she recalls the same kind of procedure, and there's thousands of this, where they feel like during their abduction, the aliens, they're trying to create space inside of their uterus, reproductive whole area, to implant the fetuses. And so the extensive use of women as hosts for hybrid babies, it brings into sharp relief the importance of the breeding program. Its scope is massive. It's just not just a few random cases from a few random women. There's been documented thousands of cases like this, where these women are being implanted with fetuses. They are becoming human incubators. And Jacobs writes, in theory, the aliens have produced hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of offspring over the course of the years, because when you look at like all of the recorded accounts, spends into the tens and the tens of thousands, and that's only the ones that have been recorded. And when you dive into this deeper, a lot of the people, the men and women who've been abducted, they don't remember every single account. And a lot of these people are abducted for their whole life, but they only remember a fraction of the amount of times. And so that's why it's theorized that this whole procedure has happened in the millions of times. And it's just like, it all can't just be fake. It all can't just be a hoax. It all can't just be this made up thing. There's just too much stuff. And I get it sounds fantastical. It sounds crazy. Like, how do you process this stuff? And it goes so much deeper. There's just no way I can get into all of it. I'm just trying to focus on the hybridization part of this. And there is another case I want to look at, Claudia Negron. And her story goes like this. She's a woman who had raised 2 children before going back to college and earning her bachelor's degree. And she described the removal process. So the part where they go in and they remove the fetus, that incubated fetus, from her. And so she said, first she saw a long instrument that the aliens inserted into her. She said it was a strange object. I don't know if it's metal or clear or whatever. They use it for making babies. They put these things together in a laboratory, in a lab, and then they insert them in the womb so that it will grow there and develop into a baby at a certain age. They monitor it. They know it's progressing. At a certain time, they come back. They take you aboard and they remove the fetus, which by that time is not fully developed, but big enough to be recognizable. They remove it, taking them to this place, and they place the fetus in this kind of fluid, a warm fluid. It's like in a tank, and the tank is filled with a lot of fluid. And that's how these fetuses keep on growing. And so her account, she remembers them taking it out, taking that fetus and putting it into some gestational tank. And so it reminds me of, like, you think of what was it called? The Matrix. All the humans are all in those massive little bubble fluid tank things. And that's kind of the idea here. They put these fetuses in this fluid, and that fluid helps them grow to develop to full babies. And a guy, his name is Joel Samuelson, a quick excerpt from one of his interviews. He claimed that during his abduction, the aliens attached a device to his reproductive organ for the purpose of sperm collection, as well as he was being forced to have intercourse with other women aboard the ship for the purpose of sperm collection. So guys get abducted for their sperm, women get abducted for their eggs, and also to be hosts for these implanted fetuses. And again, these are just a few examples of literally thousands upon thousands of accounts that have been documented. Not just random accounts, not just these random people from that there's been a massive effort, research effort that has been conducted by Jacobs as well as other researchers. And they've created a system of deciphering, fake from real. And they've put all this data together, and this is the stuff that happens over and over again. And there's no way that all of this stuff can be fake. And one of my favorite theologians, Dr. Michael Heiser, he said this. He says, if even one, take the millions of accounts probably that's out there, even one of them is true, it changes the paradigm. If even one is true. And so the point is, there is a lot of data that's out there. And so what do we do about that as Christians? How do we process this? Because you hear this and your gut reaction is, this is nonsense. It's fake. Like, it's not real. This is fairy tale. It's fantasy. Well, I want to suggest to you that there is biblical precedence for this, that we can actually see in the text biblical precedence for this. And I've alluded to this in previous episodes, but I want to talk about the Genesis 6 worldview. That Genesis 6 talks about very similar things happening on the earth. And so if you've never heard about Genesis 6 and what the text says, in Genesis 6, 1 through 4, you know what? I'm going to read it. Genesis 6, 1 to 4. It says this. It says, when man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, his days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men of old, the men of renown. So what do we see in this story? Now, when you do a lot of digging into this, the sons of God were not human men. This is not speaking about human men mating with human women. This is speaking with angels, the sons of God. Every single time that term is used in the Hebrew Bible, it's speaking of divine beings. It's not speaking of humans. And so you had these angels, these sons of God, procreating with human women, creating these hybrids who were called the Nephilim. And this is where you get all that ancient folklore of the Titans and all of Greek mythology. All of that stuff stems from right here, because these Nephilim were hybrid, were part human, part divine, part angel. And these were the giants. These were the heroes of old. These are where you get all of that ancient folklore from. But they're hybrids. Now you're asking, well, why would they do that? What is the purpose of creating all of these hybrids? Like what was going on here? We have to understand. You go back to Genesis 3, when Adam and Eve fell, and God came to Adam and Eve. He pronounced a curse on them, but he also cursed the serpent, the devil. And basically he said that the seed of the woman, the offspring of the woman, is going to crush your head. And so right from Genesis 3:15, there has been this seed war happening. And so the devil was like, okay, I don't want that to happen. So what did he do? He put in motion this whole process to pollute the DNA of humanity. Because obviously the Messiah, Jesus, could not come from a tainted bloodline. He had to come from a pure bloodline. And so when you see here in Genesis 6, this whole process, they're trying to, this is a whole massive subject here. I'm giving you a quick version, but the whole purpose of this is that they're trying to pollute the bloodline here, creating these hybrids. And this is what precipitated the flood, because it was only Noah and his sons and his sons' wives that apparently were still blameless in the sense that their blood wasn't tampered with, their blood wasn't tainted. And so then God sent the flood to wipe out everyone, because they were all, that bloodline was warped up, jacked up, hybridized. And then when you dive into this deeper and you look at other ancient material that's written about that time, and you see what they were doing, they weren't just creating these human angelic hybrids, but they were creating angelic animal hybrids. This is where you get all of the minotaurs and the centaurs and those kind of creatures. And they were also mixing animal with animal, and they were blending, and they were splicing the DNA. They were doing all of this kind of stuff. Does this not sound familiar? Does this not look like, at least resemble this alien phenomenon? Hybridization, creating hybrids to infiltrate the human race. This is what they were doing back then. And so this is why I look at that, and it's just like, it's not exactly the same, but it's the whole purpose behind it is this mixing of human and divine DNA, creating hybridized creatures, trying to infiltrate the human race, trying to mess up the seed. It's always been a seed war. And we see that right in the text. So this concept, this hybridizing of human with divine, this is not a new thing. It's happened already. It's not a long shot to look at the whole alien phenomenon and say, well, okay, it's the same thing. It's very similar, and I don't think it's coincidence. And so my personal opinion on aliens is I don't think aliens are demons. A lot of people think aliens are demons. I think there could be, out of those, that different hierarchy of aliens where you have the Insectilians and then you have the robe dudes and all that, I think some of them could fall into the fallen angel category. You know, I think my theory's kind of changing. I'm wrestling with that right now. But I definitely think that aliens, they are entities that exist in the kingdom of darkness. That there's different factions that make up the kingdom of darkness. There's different factions that make up the kingdom of light, kingdom of God. Good guys, bad guys, good side, bad side. It's not just one kind. It's not just angels and demons and that's it. There's so much more going on, and I think that aliens represent just another faction. And they could be connected with the fallen angels. Again, this whole thing is way more complex than you and I could fathom or understand, and we may not have and get all the answers this side of heaven. It's just that when you look at the phenomenon and you look at what they were doing and the purpose of interbreeding with humanity, well, that's already happened. Genesis 6, interbreeding with humanity, creating these hybrids. It's happened. It's happening. And so I think that there's biblical precedence for that. And so that's why once I learned that, when you take that and you then weigh it against the alien phenomenon, it's just like, that's why you can't just dismiss it. I'm still wrestling with as well. But when I look at the data that's out there and I see what's happened in the text, it's not a coincidence, and I don't think it's a coincidence, and I do think it merits discussion, and it merits research, and it merits at least, taking the time to dive a bit deeper into it and not just dismissing it as fake, as a hoax, as nonsense, as not real, because I do think there's something going on. And so that's the biblical precedence, and I want to just conclude with looking at the question, so how should Christians deal with abductions then? Like how do we handle that? Someone who is taken by aliens from their bed, from driving a car. I mean, the way abductions happen, it varies all across the board. A lot of times it's from their sleep at night. People have reported that they've been driving in their car down a road, and all of a sudden 5 hours have gone by and they come to and they realize they are like 5 miles from where they were driving. There's a whole bunch of different scenarios and ways that abductions happen, but how do we wrap our minds around this as Christians? Like, how do we deal with the question, like, how can that happen? If aliens are real, what gives them the right to take humans? What gives them the right to take Christians? Because here's the crazy thing. A lot of these abductions happen to Christians. And so this is why it messes with me a bit, because I'm like, this is not just non-believers, it's happening to believers. And so, like, how can we make sense of this? And so I'm not an expert. I'm just trying to process this myself. And so here are some of my conclusions that I've come to right now. And again, these could change, but as I'm recording this podcast, here's what I've come up with to kind of process this whole subject here. And so how do they pick the victims? How do they decide who gets abducted and who doesn't? Well, when you look at the research, a lot of them suggest that the aliens keep abductions in the bloodline, which means they don't arbitrarily just pick random people. It's not like, who can I grab? Who's easy pickings here? It's more so that's strategic. It has to do with the bloodline. And so chances are, as it's reported, that if abductions were happening in your lineage, so if your great-grandma was abducted, then your grandma was most likely abducted, then your mom or your dad was abducted, you're going to be abducted, and then your kids are will be abducted. It's a generational thing, and it has to do with the bloodline. And so it generally happens to people in generations where it's already been happening, and it's not just a one-time event, but it's a continuous event through your whole life. People aren't just abducted one time and that's it. It's literally happening year after year, and it's typically happening in multiple generations in a family line. So the Bible speaks to this. The Bible talks about this being generational iniquities or generational curses. This idea where, and I've seen this in deliverance ministry. If someone in the moment that we were talking to struggled with a particular, or felt like they struggled with a particular thing, oftentimes you could trace that back in their history to the origin of that happening. And it created this opening in the family line where the great-great-grandma maybe participated in the occult, witchcraft, or something of that nature. And that opened up a door for the demonic realm to kind of come in there and then messed up the succeeding generations. And then the person that we were dealing with was, had a lot of demonic encounters, was struggling, and blah, 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 blah. And it's all related. It's a generational iniquity that gets passed on from generation to generation that needs to be broken. Oh, okay. And I want to say this on top of that. In the research as well, they did discover that there are a lot of the times in the generational lineage, there was occultic and satanic practice happening. So some of the evidence at least suggests that the abduction occurs to people who have a history of participate, or in their lineage has a history of participating in satanic occultic practice. And so that was discovered a lot. And so when you tie that into a biblical narrative, generational iniquities, to me that makes sense, because not even talking about abductions, but you in your lineage, let's say a murder took place, or let's say there was a sexual abuse that occurred, or things pertaining to that creates openings for the demonic to come into that family line, and you see in every subsequent generation that same pattern happening over and over again. And so, like, that's an already prevalent and real manifestation that's happening right now. And so the alien thing, abduction, could work that same way, where for whatever reason in the lineage there are certain rituals and ceremonies, certain occultic practices or whatever, that creates an opening that allows then these aliens to begin abducting people in that generational line, if that makes sense. And so that's one way to process the abduction phenomenon, of why a Christian would be abducted, for example, because it's in their family line and it never got broken. It's a generational iniquity that never got broken. And then another way is there's specific DNA markers. And again, this can dive into a whole other rabbit hole with bloodlines. And when you start looking into things, the Illuminati bloodlines and all of the stuff that goes into that, there are these ancient bloodlines that create these DNA markers in certain people and certain family lines that, however, the aliens are aware of, and those are the people who have that special DNA marker in their bloodline that they attract the abductions as well. And so that's also been put forth as a reason why or how certain people get picked for abduction. So you have generational stuff happening. You know, people have created openings in their family line, and then you have DNA markers as to reasons as to how victims get chosen. Now, are those the only ones? I have no idea. Are those even right? I don't know. I'm just saying, from a Christian perspective, this is how I can wrap my head around this phenomenon from happening to a Christian. And there's a lot of evidence in the research, in the data, that seems to lean to that. So what now? So let's say a Christian has that. A Christian gets abducted. Let's say there was an opening in their family line, either DNA marker or generational iniquity, that in their family line their great-great-great-grandmother was a witch, or some satanic occultic practice was happening and it created an opening, and now their whole line is now marked so abduction can happen. How does a Christian process this now? Well, this is where I differ from some of the Christian ufologists that I've looked at and studied. Because I think and I believe that, as we read in Colossians, that all things, visible and invisible, were made by Jesus for him. That he's over all. That there is no divine being, no entity, nothing, no demonic power that can overthrow Jesus. Like, he is Lord over all. Like, that is huge. And one of the examples that I love in Scripture is the story of him with that demoniac, the dude who lived in the graves, where Jesus got off the boat and this guy runs up to him, possessed by legion. This guy was possessed by literally hundreds of demons. Runs up to Jesus, and then in one moment, Jesus delivers the man. Hundreds upon hundreds of demons in him, instantaneously cast out. Now, there is no entity, there's no darkness, there's no power that trumps Jesus. Doesn't exist. Now, this guy didn't have to go through 15 steps of deliverance. There was no negotiation. So I think that for Christians, This is where deliverance ministries, to me, it gets into this weird area where you have a lot of these ministries and there's these specific formula and structure of prayers and how to pray this, and you have to renounce and repent this way, and you have to list all the things, and then you pray this prayer and you pray it this way and cast it. I don't understand it all. And again, I've been part of a deliverance ministry, and we had our own structure, and we saw people, I've seen people with my own eyes get set free, and I've encountered the demonic right in front of me. Like, I've seen it, and it's real, and the power of God is real. The power of God always trumps the enemy. I've seen it. But when it comes to people who are experiencing this stuff, I believe with all my whole heart that you bring it to Jesus, and Jesus, his power, he can stop it. Like, I've heard some Christian ufologists and researchers say, you can't just claim the name of Jesus and have an abduction stop. And I'm like, I can't fully buy that, because that's just not what I see in the scripture. Jesus cast out a dude with hundreds of demons in a second. And the spirit that raised Christ from the dead lives inside of us. When we give our lives to Jesus, he takes up residence. So I think that if you are a Christian and you've been abducted and it's in your family line, that it can stop with you. That whatever openings that are in your family lineage, that repent and renounce it and ask God to close all those openings, to close all those doors, and he will. And once those doors are shut, those abductions, they have to stop, because Jesus is in charge. And so this is where hope comes in, that as believers, you can ask Jesus to set you free, and he will. Just like he does with other demonic attacks. I mean, I grew up in a pastor's home, and man, I was attacked from a young age. Like, I've had crazy demonic stuff happen, but Jesus has delivered me out of it. He wins. The enemy doesn't win. And so if you're an unbeliever and you're getting abducted, and there's openings in your family history and your family past, to me, that's a scary place to be in, because I don't know what you're going to do there. But if you're a believer and you're giving your life to Jesus, now, if you're a Christian and you're participating and you create I think it's possible to create openings in your life. Like, if you're a Christian and you start messing around with demonic stuff, don't be surprised if demonic stuff happens. But if you're a Christian, you've given your life to Jesus and you've put away all that stuff, and if you've repented and you've renounced your lineage and the stuff that may have happened and the stuff that you've done, and the blood of Jesus comes in and wipes everything clean, man, that it has to stop. And so I think that, again, this is where there's hope. And this is where I land on this issue, is I look at an abduction as a demonic attack, if you will. It's a different variation of a demonic attack that the enemy has used before, and they're using again. It may look a little bit different, but it's nothing new. And whatever purposes they're using, and they're conducting these abductions and all the stuff that's happening, and regardless, Jesus is over it all still. And if you're a believer, man, you have to lean into Christ, and Jesus will set you free. Like, I have to land there as a Bible-believing Christian who's given, like, if someone gives their life to Jesus and has repented and renounced and asked Jesus to close all those doors that may have happened hundreds of years ago in your family line, that's created openings, Jesus will shut those doors. And so you don't have to live a life of being perpetually demonically attacked via abduction as a believer. You don't. And so that's how I land on this. And so, yeah. So if you're watching this and you're a Christian and you're experiencing this stuff, you don't have to live with it. You don't have to live in fear. There may be some work you have to do in terms of repenting, in terms of, renouncing, in terms of going to God and repenting for your grandparents, repenting for your ancestors, or whatever. Like that stuff. I mean, this whole generational iniquity thing is real. It's complicated, but at the end of the day, the blood of Jesus can wipe everything clean. And so you don't have to live in fear. Jesus can set you free. He is stronger than any alien abduction. He's stronger than any alien entity. Yeah. And so this is a complicated subject, and I mean, I just scratched the surface, and hopefully this made somewhat sense. Um, Again, aliens, they are another entity in the unseen realm. I think in the kingdom of darkness, they're not good guys, they're bad guys. This is in our worldview. This is something that's not new. Their whole hybridization or the breeding program is nothing new. It's Genesis 6, repurposed. And I don't know all the why to that, what the purpose is today, and how that plays into the end times. And that's a whole other discussion, but it's nothing new. And I think abductions are just another form of a demonic attack that can be stopped. And Jesus is Lord over all. So that's it for episode 30. Not sure if I'm going to pick up on this in future episodes. I don't know. Let me know what you think. If you want me to dive a bit deeper into this, leave a comment in the description below. Leave any questions. We'd love to start a conversation. But yeah, thanks so much for watching and for listening. And have an awesome rest of your day, evening, and we'll see you all in the next episode. Much love. God bless.